Welcome to our deep dive into today's news from the Faroe Islands. We're looking at politics, news, sports, and even a quick weather update, using sources like Kringvarp Faroe in.fo and vp.fo, just to give us a broad overview.
Yeah, it's like a quick download of what's happening across the islands today, so you can form your own opinions and maybe dig deeper into whatever catches your attention.
Exactly. So let's kick things off with politics. The Suarjortenalen project is still making waves, of course. The deadline for public feedback on the undersea tunnel, it's been pushed back to December 12th.
That extension is interesting. It kind of shows how much debate there is around it. Some folks see it as essential, for connecting the islands, boosting the economy, but others are worried about what it might do to the environment.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of scrutiny, the Ombudsman has criticized the regulation on timed special arrangements for demersal fishing. They found it wasn't really based on solid legal grounds.
Oh, that's tricky. Raises some questions about how these fishing regulations are put into practice and overseen, especially since fishing is such a big part of the Faroes economy.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to some general news now. There was an unfortunate and kind of unusual incident, a car accident in Miavag. But it involves cattle on the road.
Yeah, I saw that. Sadly, one of the cows had to be put down because of the injuries.
Right, that's awful. On a different note, the Red Cross is reporting that 1,400 people are in need of food and clothing assistance.
Wow, that's a lot for the Faroe Islands. Shows you that economic hardship is a reality for some people, even here.
Yeah, it does. And then in Klaksvik, there was a power outage for a while. Believe it or not, a car crashed into an electrical cabinet. Power's back on now, but
Things happen, huh? But yeah, it reminds you how even small incidents can disrupt things, especially in a place like the Faroe Islands.
for sure. Okay, let's talk sports. Some good news on that front. The Faroes women's handball team made history. They got their first ever point in a European Championship match.
That's fantastic. A draw against Croatia, huge achievement for the team. Everyone's celebrating.
Rightfully so. And in the Hotel Djurhus League, TB beat Mjolnir, which puts them in third place now.
Nice. It's getting pretty competitive in the league this season.
Definitely. All right, before we move on, let's just take a quick peek at the weather.
Sure. Looks like the next week is going to be a mix. Cold temperatures, wind, maybe some calmer periods in between. Typical Faroes weather, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's about right. Always keeps things interesting. All right, so there you have it. A snapshot of today's news from around the Faroe Islands.
Now it's up to you to decide what you find most interesting. And maybe what you want to learn more about, thinking about it. It's kind of fascinating to see how these different news stories we talked about, they reflect what life is like in the Faroe Islands, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. We've got these big infrastructure projects, then economic challenges, sporting achievements too, all happening on this, remote group of islands.
And speaking of the economic challenges, the Red Cross report about people needing help with food and clothing. It's a reminder that even with a strong social safety net, some people still struggle.
Makes you wonder what's causing those hardships, right? And how the community is trying to tackle them.
Yeah, for sure. And about that accident with the car and the cattle, might seem like a freak event, but it shows how closely people, livestock, and the environment are connected here in the Faroe Islands.
True. Sometimes those interactions can have unexpected consequences. Speaking of unexpected, that car crashing into the electrical cabinet in Klaksvik caused quite a bit of disruption.
Shows you how important reliable services are, especially in a place so exposed to the elements like the Faroe Islands.
Absolutely. Glad they got the power back on quickly, though. Okay, let's switch gears to something a bit more positive. That win for the Faroes women's handball team. That's incredible.
It really is their first point ever in a European Championship match. They earned it, that's for sure. The whole country's proud of them.
Absolutely. It's inspiring to see them playing at that level. Shows what's possible here in the Faroe Islands.
And while we're on the subject of handball, TB's win over Mjolnir adds to the excitement of the local league.
Yeah, it does. Keeps things interesting, for sure. So we've covered a lot of ground today, the Suarjortenalen project and all the debates surrounding it, the heartwarming story of the handball team's success. It's been quite a deep dive.
It really gives you a taste of what life is like in the Faroe Islands. Political decisions, community events, sporting achievements, all mixed together, makes for a unique place.
Definitely does. And before we wrap up this part, let's not forget the one thing that always shapes life in the Faroes, the weather. Cold temperatures, wind, maybe some calmer periods. It's all part of the experience.
It's a good reminder that even with all the news headlines and political debates, nature always has the last word.
Very true. Now, before we jump into the final part of our deep dive, I want to hear from you. What story stuck with you? What questions do you have?
It's fascinating to think about how the Faroe Islands are a microcosm of what's happening in the world, isn't it? Environmental concerns, economic challenges, the power of sports, the strength of community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we move on to the last part of our deep dive, we'll continue to explore those themes, uncover what makes the Faroe Islands so captivating. As we wrap up our look at the Faroe Islands today, it's amazing how all these different news stories, they really give you a sense of what it's like to live here, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about big political debates about infrastructure projects, and then everyday things like car accidents involving cattle, power outages caused by unexpected crashes. It's all part of life here.
And even in a place that seems as isolated as the Faroe Islands, things like legal processes and regulations, they have a real impact on people's lives. Like with that ombudsman critique of the fishing regulations.
Exactly. It's not just abstract stuff, it affects people's livelihoods and the environment.
Right. But on a lighter note, we can't forget about that incredible win for the Faroes women's handball team. Shows the power of sports to bring people together, create a sense of national pride.
It's a great story. And then thinking about the weather forecast for the coming week, the cold, the wind, maybe some calmer periods too, it just shows how resilient the Faroes people are. They've adapted to these ever-changing elements.
Yeah, it's all part of living here. Well, there you have it, our deep dive into today's news from the Faroe Islands. Hope you found it insightful, maybe sparked some new questions for you.
Staying informed is important, but the real journey starts when we connect the dots. See the bigger picture. Think about how these events affect us on a local and global scale.
That's a great point. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep into the world around you. Thanks for joining us.